Welcome back to Danny Fandom Month. Today we are talking about episode 6, which is titled What You Want. So the plot of this one is there's a genie ghost who grants wishes called Desiree. Get it? Because it sounds like desire. And so she grants the wishes of various characters, and then they turn into like weird ghost versions of themselves, and then Danny has to fight them and pull a ghost out of them. And the main conflict is this episode is focused on Tucker, who becomes jealous of Danny because Danny's got all these cool powers and Tucker just has to sit on the sidelines and all that. So Tucker wishes that he also had ghost powers. Desiree grants him that wish, and then Tucker starts to abuse them, but then of course becomes like a dark version of himself, and eventually Danny and him have to fight. Danny finds out about Desiree and ends up defeating her quite easily when he just wishes that she would go into his thermos, and then that works. So there you go. And then there's this great line where he says, man, if I weren't a C student, I would have thought of that 5 days ago, which is hilarious. And I, again, love that Danny is not that smart because it makes him more of an underdog and it makes things more of a challenge for him. So then Danny uses the Fenton Dreamcatcher, which is like a native dreamcatcher, but for ghosts. They introduced that at the beginning of the episode, and then at the end, Danny uses that to get the ghost out of Tucker. And then they apologize and make up. They're like, oh, I'm sorry that I was a show-off, and oh, I'm sorry that blah, 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 blah. And it's whatever. The Fenton Dreamcatcher is of note because it comes back into play in later episodes. Oh, also in this episode, this is the first one that uses Danny's Ghost Ray, which is just, he can shoot lasers out of his hands. Yep. And yeah, that becomes one of his main powers. This is a pretty whatever episode. There's this subplot about different characters getting sick. Sam has a cold, so she's in bed basically the whole episode, which I think is an excuse to have this contrived plot where Danny and Tucker are fighting, because if Sam was there, she would just tell them to stop and that would be the end of the episode. Also, there's kind of this weird narration with Tucker explaining like how he's jealous of Danny and stuff like that, and they don't do anything like that at all in any other episode that I can think. Actually, no, there might be an episode narrated by Jazz later on, but we'll get there. But yeah, it's kind of weird and not really necessary and makes the episode feel a little more contrived and weird. I think the problem is that this should be a good idea to have an episode focused on Tucker since he is one of the main characters, but the problem is that like once you get that, it's just like not that interesting. So there's a few kind of great moments in this one. Paulina gets turned into a version of Sayonara Pussycat, which is the show's version of Hello Kitty, which is really funny. There's an Easter egg in the background of that scene where you can see that there's a video game of Crash Nebula, who is like a Flash Gordon character from the Fairly Odd Parents. There's actually an episode of the Fairly Odd Parents that's like a whole like backdoor pilot of a Crash Nebula show that Butch Hartman was pitching at around the same time of Danny Phantom. And if you watch that episode, Crash Nebula, when which is about Crash Nebula as a teenager, learning how to be a Flash Gordon space hero character. But if you watch that episode, there's a scene where he's reading a Danny Phantom comic book. So there you go, a little cross promotion. There's also a point when they're in Casper High and there's just a poster on the wall that says, "Read, don't be an idiot," which is amazing. And the Lancer book report for today is Gulliver's Travels starring Jack Black. That's about it. Not a whole lot to this episode other than introducing a couple things that do come back. Desiree, Danny's Ghost Ray, of course, one of his main powers, and the Fenton Dreamcatcher. But yeah, a fairly contrived plot with Tucker, which should be more interesting since he is one of the main characters, but it really just doesn't have a whole lot to it. And that's about it. Tune in tomorrow for another episode.